Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us at this Death and Bereavement special for Content Tea Time, hosted by me, Helen Lawson, and Joe Sco, who's upstairs in my spare room.
Hello.
There are going to be 5 lightning talks today. Each talk is 10 minutes, and we're going to go straight through talk after talk after talk, just because we want to try and keep to time. We're going to take questions at the end, but if you want, you can put them in the chat as and when they occur to you. And then the person whose talk you listened to can maybe go back and answer your questions in the chat. The discussion afterwards may run over time because I know a lot of people have got a lot to say about this topic. And if it does, Joe and I are quite relaxed, so long as you allow us to get a glass of wine from the fridge. We will stay on the call for a little bit longer and chat if that feels like something that you want to join in on. And we are recording this session. We've got 5 speakers: Lisa Ford from Nationwide, Jane McFadden and James Orange from DWP, Jamie Kane, my colleague from Co-op, Sarah Key, who is the content designer at the NHS Blood and Transport Service, and Nia Campbell, she's a content designer from Content Design London. So I'm going to ask if Lisa can start to share her screen. And Lisa is from Nationwide Building Society. I met Lisa a few months ago where she asked me on Twitter if I would chat with her about the Co-op funeral care tone of voice principles, and we did. We had a great chat, and she's done quite a lot of work on Nationwide's bereavement journey and helping somebody through that from a nationwide point of view. So I'm really, really interested to see what she's found out. So over to you, please, Lisa.
Thank you. So just to give you all a bit of background, I've been at Nationwide 7 months, and the bereavement project was the first project that I was put on. And it was the main focus was trying to take a look at it, look at the journey, to see if I can help improve it. So to give you a bit of context about Nationwide Voice, as a building society, we're very customer focused. So we use the term member to describe the people who bank with us. And people who bank with us being members of the society, it's really important that we have a tone of voice that's inclusive. So there's no them and us approach to the words we use. We aim to be easy to understand, accessible, but most importantly, and I think this is really key for bereavement, we have to be respectful and personal. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of give you a quick overview of some of the work I've been doing. The first thing I'm going to do is kind of explain what it's like at the moment. So the way we frame it at Nationwide is we ask someone to tell us that someone has died. Now, there are 3 channels to do that on. So the main channel is the branch. Because we are people focused, a lot of our users come in a branch to inform us that someone's died. And then on top of that, we have a form online. So people can come onto our website and then someone can give us a call on the phone. Now, I'm going to specifically focus on, obviously, a bereavement journey is quite a long and complicated process with a bank. So the first stage of it is notifying us of a death. And after they notify us of a death, we need to take them through the stages of looking at their account and looking at the dead person's account and then closing that account. Okay, but the main interaction a person will do with us, and the most complicated interaction, is that notification up front of giving us that information and kind of understanding where they're at with that information. So we have the website, which kind of it's quite detailed. It was one of the first things I did notice. It was, spread across 4 different web pages. It was trying to cover everything. There was a bit of repetition, a lot of link to outside sources. And then once you kind of access that form online, there was several different pages of the form asking lots of bits of information. But the key things we need when we begin the journey with Nationwide are: who has died, what are their personal details, what's their date of death, and who is that legal representative that we are going to communicate with to deal with their estate. That's kind of like the beginning, very beginning, and that's the first thing we started to look at. How are we dealing with that, and how can I make that better? So now in the picture, now the research was really important here. And now the business directive from Nationwide with that journey was, obviously we want to improve it, but there was this kind of attitude of we need to make it faster, we need to make it simpler, and we wanted to make sure that we were getting that was the right thing to do. So what did the research say? And interestingly, it was, I mean, we interviewed about 12 people over the course of a year, and that was to do with what their direct experiences were with Nationwide going through that bereavement from the beginning to end. And one of the first things that came out of it was that even the most digitally active people are not drawn to that digital process. So some of them weren't even looking at our website. Some of them weren't even engaging with that form online, and it was mostly a person-to-person experience. And so, you know, it kind of gave us that insight that we were offering multiple channels, but not all of them were being used. But then at the same time, one of the other things that people talked about was wanting a choice of channel. They wanted to be able to come to us in person for that personal experience, but also to step away and when they needed to move on, to maybe call us or to use that online forum if there was one available. And they let us know that, you know, because the bereavement is such a personal experience, they needed to be able to switch when they wanted to and not because they had to. So the second point was that their time was important, but it wasn't about speed. Now, I thought this was really interesting because this kind of informed us against that business assumption of needing to make the process faster. So when they talked about that time, they also talked about being in control. So the primary focus then became to make each interaction count and not about making it quick to do. And that again leads into the next point, which was I need reassurance that I'm doing the right thing. So having reassurance about doing the right thing is not just about the content and the product, but how we're communicating again. So are these different channels that they're experiencing with us, are they consistent? Are they giving the right message? And then even more interestingly to me was paper is critical to organisation. So not everything has to be digital, and actually what they want is physical pieces of paper to keep them organised. I mean, we all know how we feel about our finances. These physical copies were helping the user feel like we were being more transparent, so it was building trust. So where we are at the moment and what we're doing. Okay, so first thing that we decided to do, obviously this is a very challenging journey, and like I said at the beginning, we focused only on notification at the start. We are just redesigning the form online so that it's easier to use. Now, that comes as part of wanting to make sure that if they are going to choose that channel, it's doing the right thing. Because right now, there's a lot of language on there that wasn't making a lot of sense to people. One of the main subjects that is brought up throughout all of the channels is this reference to a personal representative. Now, a personal representative is mentioned quite a lot in the online form. Now, that's actually in reference to an executor of their estate or someone responsible for their finances, and a lot of the time people didn't necessarily understand what that meant. So we're kind of revisiting that, looking at that approach to how we're labeling things, whether it's online or in all of the journeys, to make sure that we're giving the right message. And we kind of need to give them a bigger picture of when we're talking about certain roles, what those mean and what our expectations are, just to build that understanding of where they are on a journey and the reassurance of they're doing the right thing at the right moment. And then that links again to reviewing what's on the website. Does it need to be there? Is it relevant? Is what's there presented at the right place at the right time and in the right way? And one of the things that we're doing is we're prototyping a more interactive approach to what's on there. So instead of bombarding them with all of this information all at once that they would have to mine to find the answers, we're going to sort of take a questioning approach. We're going to ask them why they've come to us, what it is they need, to then give them the pieces of information as and when they tell us what they need, as opposed to just here it all is, pick something, find it yourself. Because as we know, it's not necessarily an easy experience for them. It's a personal experience for everybody. Everyone experiences bereavement differently, and having to mine a website for information if they're struggling isn't a solution that they want. Really, they want to be able to go and have us hand them the data that they need when they need it, to kind of reduce that negative friction that they're already experiencing in the day-to-day. And then finally, and most importantly for me, we are testing a new communication strategy for them. So right now, the journey is fundamentally just a letter-based journey. Now, that's good because we know that paper is critical to organisation, but it's not giving them awareness of where they are and what they need to do next. And you know, the first thing we're doing is we're introducing a text to confirm that we have the information that they've given us. We know that they've come to us, and it's just a confirmation like, we've got this, you've told us we've got this. And then secondly, we're introducing emails to the journey. This gives the option for the user to choose how we communicate with them. It allows some more immediate updates so they know where they are. We're also adding in sort of like a change to the language in those emails and the letters so that we're improving how we're talking to them. And you know, it's not about duplicating content, it's about making sure we're saying the right thing at the right time. And so that's happening over the next few months, and we're doing that in pockets so that we're testing and learning as we go. And then the next step will be making sure that whatever we're doing in the background matches that in-branch journey. So we're mirroring the language, we're mirroring the story there. One of the things I found really interesting, just as a final point, one of the things I found really interesting about me researching this independently as a designer is there's not a lot out there for the financial sector with regards to this. So if anyone listening works in the financial sector, my emails are open, come talk to me, let's talk about this problem together, because I think that a problem shared is a problem halved. So we can solve this problem together. So yeah, that's me.
That was great. Thank you so much, Lisa. In the interest of to try and keep to time, we're going to quickly move on. But if anyone's got any questions for Lisa, you can pop them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. So if we've got Jane and James ready.
Yeah, just getting my content ready now.
Lovely. Thank you. If you share your screen, I'll give you a quick introduction.
I should be coming through now. Fingers crossed. Yeah.
It's coming. Yeah, we've got you. Thanks, Jane. So Jane and James are content designers at DWP Digital. They work on service design for DWP bereavement services. So that's stuff like Tell Us Once, bereavement support payments and funeral expense payments. Jane and James are going to talk to us about their work on the bereavement services and share the main insights that have helped them design the content for the different services. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. Thanks. I was going to introduce myself, but you've done it so beautifully. Thank you. So James is also on the call, so I'll hand over to him when his slides come up, if that's okay. But since we're introduced already, I'll crack on. So I just wanted to really start with a quick overview of the bereavement services at DWP that you might not be aware of, and then we'll focus on some of the insights we've got through our user research. So Tell Us Once is a service on gov.uk, and that helps you tell many government departments all at once when somebody dies. So for example, the Passport Office, DVLA for drivers, DWP and HMRC for state pension and other benefits, and even local councils and other pension schemes. And when a person registers a death, the registrar will explain the Tell Us Once service and then either complete the service with the person or then give them a unique reference number that then they can use to go away and use on gov.uk later or by phone. The bereavement support payment is a service for eligible working age people whose partner has died. It's not means tested, so it doesn't matter how much someone earns. People can apply by phone or using a paper form and online. Our digital service is currently in private beta, so we can't promote it just yet. And funeral expenses payment is for people on certain benefits who need help to pay for a funeral. And at the moment, this service is only available by phone or by using a paper form. So just a quick shout out at this point. This is a culmination of many others' hard work over the years, in particular, building on the brilliant foundations put in place by our lead content designer, Simon Bramble, and user researcher, Mel Kocher, and especially the amazing work of Lindsay Green, senior content designer, and user researcher Anna Wheelock, who not only researched during lockdown, but designed and built the bereavement support service during the pandemic. So a big shout out to those guys. So our top insights. Confirmation. Like many major life events, there's a lot of paperwork and things to do following a bereavement. And this often needs to be done while juggling a load of different tasks, dealing with multiple organisations and people family and friends, and whatever else is needed to be done at the same time. And people might not choose to do the same task do some tasks at different times. At night, for example, when they're lying awake, unable to sleep, and when the house is quiet during the day. It could be whenever they can face it or whenever they have support available. And a confirmation reminds them and gives them the confidence that this has been done or that something has been received. So think about your users at this point. A confirmation could help them just take one thing off their list. So I'll hand over to James now for the next slide.
Thanks, Jane. So something that we found as we were putting our content together for the bereavement support payment service, letting people apply for bereavement support payment, was to avoid messages of sympathy, things like offering condolences or saying things like "we're sorry for your loss." I put full sympathy in the slide title. I mean, it may be well intentioned, you may want to offer that sympathy, but to some people it may not come across as genuine. We don't always know how people are feeling. Not everyone is upset in the same ways by a death. The bereavement could come at the end of a long illness. They may be well prepared for it, or the person who's died may not be someone that they liked. It's not one size fits all, so we can't assume and make those kind of statements. And similarly, avoiding kind of euphemistic languages around death, saying loss or passed away. This kind of thing is just less direct than saying that someone has died, and talking about death in that way. People need us to be upfront with our language. They know what they're dealing with, and if someone has died, then it's okay to say that. I found that by trying to be kind, you often use more words. And the feeling that if going through this application process is going to be emotionally painful or triggering for some people, then we should try and help people just get through it rather than reading lengthy condolences. We want people to understand what they need to do. This guidance on using this kind of language has gone out into the DWP style guide, and some people maybe felt that they'd be afraid that being clear was being disrespectful, but by being direct, you can show empathy, and you can be supportive in an appropriate way. Just move to the next slide, please, Jane. So one of the ways that you can help kind of show that respect and help people get through the process is by making it less overwhelming. We've all been put off by things that we don't want to do, overwhelmed by a tick list of admin tasks to do. And when you're bereaved, there's lots of things that you need to do. You need to deal with government in lots of different ways. So there are some ways that we've used in our design to make completing the service less off-putting. So one of the things we did was telling them how long it was going to take. So this maybe is not typical for government services, but putting on the front page that it's going to just take 15 minutes to complete. Lots of people found that very helpful. As Jane's mentioned, people that will be completing these things at different times of day, they'll be squeezing it in amongst other tasks that they've got to do, and in moments when they feel like they have the emotional kind of capacity to do that. We've had comments during research that, oh, if it just takes 15 minutes, that's great. That's something I can do. We also tell people exactly what they need before they start the process, and we tell them twice in 2 different locations, and we've added an action so that people need to confirm that they've got the documents that they need before they can proceed. So if people have got they're distracted, they find it hard to concentrate, we know that they've read that list and they've got those documents, and what we're trying to do there is to stop the need to take a break partway through the service, partway through the application, to run off and find their partner's national insurance number. You might imagine that going through their partner's personal belongings midway through the kind of process like this could be emotionally triggering, could be upsetting to them, and they may find that they don't come back and complete what they need to complete. So that's been really helpful to kind of confirm what they need there. We've also broken the service down into shorter sections. And this allows us to, at the start of each section, explain exactly what they were going to ask in the upcoming section. So during research, we had one user that was terrified that we were going to ask questions about how their partner had died. And when they saw the screen, it was said, OK, the next section is going to be about your partner, but we're just going to be asking when they died, where they worked, have they ever lived abroad, these kind of things. They knew exactly what questions we were going to ask, and they felt that they could, this was something that they could take on and that they could move forward without being concerned about any surprises or any questions that they were going to find upsetting. So those kind of sections, interruption pages we call them, really were helpful. They gave people that chance to pause, regroup, and proceed when ready. Okay, next slide, please, Jane. Breaking things down into sections obviously helps make it simple. We talk a lot about cognitive load as content designers, but for bereaved people, this is already pretty high. You know, emotion, stress, shock. May never have been bereaved before, may never had someone die. All of it adds to the cognitive load, even before they've tried to come to our content and our service. So using sections, okay, helped us pre-warn users about what to expect, but it helped also make it manageable, break the service down into manageable chunks. We had smaller check your answers pages. In government services, you might find long ones of these at the end of the service so you can review your answers, but we created smaller ones, so if they weren't able to concentrate or were easily distracted, you know, they could just get that done in chunks as they went through the journey. And including, you know, the gov.uk guidance to have just one question per screen. This was really helpful to them as well. So it's about respecting the user's time, just being clear with our language, as I've said, not using euphemisms, that kind of thing, clear and consistent, and helping them get through the process simply. Jane, if you want to go to the next slide.
Yeah, so this one is about the right channel at the right time. So our research has found that bereaved people prefer to use a service in a way that suits them and at the time that suits them. And for some, that's using a service out of business hours or in the middle of the night when they can't sleep, or even when avoiding occasions. So, for example, we've had people using our bereavement support payment digital service on New Year's Eve and during Christmas Day. And of course, our telephone lines are not available then, so they chose the channel that was right for them at the time. Now, some people may choose to go online, so they don't have to speak yet again about the bereavement. And equally, others are isolated and might choose telephone service because they want to speak to another human. But perhaps someone doesn't have access to a computer and they don't want to speak to someone and would just prefer a paper form. If you only offer one channel, of course, this limits how people can use your service, and that could affect if they use it at all. And that's it. Thank you for listening to our talk today, and I'll stop sharing.
That was excellent. Thank you very much. Both talks so far, absolutely superb. Jamie, if you can start sharing your screen, please. But I really did enjoy that, not least because I based my entire career on telling people not to use euphemisms. So it's nice to have that backed up by government. So thank you. I'm going to introduce you now to Jamie Kane. And Jamie works at Co-op with me. He's my colleague. I work with him every day. And he's going to take you through the importance and how to do user research with people that have been affected by death. Over to you, Jamie.
Cheers, Helen. Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Jamie. And yeah, I'm going to go into a little bit about giving you an overall idea of some of our research and some practical tips to do it as well that I hope you find useful. And reach out to me on any of like Twitter or email or in the chat as well if you've got any questions or want to talk a bit more deeply. So I'm going to start with this kind of quote: without research, designers guesswork. I think that applies to any kind of design, any services, but even more so when you're dealing with a death, because it is so emotionally complex, it's so overwhelming. And that's why we need to design these services well, because if we do that, we can hopefully make things easier rather than just adding to any of the stresses. And I think we've seen that with some of the talks already. I think that one of the best ways to do that is to make sure user research is being fully integrated into that process so we can really get closer to the actual real needs of people involved. So a little bit of a glimpse into some of the research we've been doing recently. We've been running a discovery into end-of-life planning. So as kind of Helen alluded to at the start, this is when someone's terminally ill and kind of starting to make plans, perhaps for a funeral, and you might have like the wider network of family or friends involved in this step as well. And you could be looking at kind of legal and financial things. Also, it's a very complex scenario. So a few quotes here to give you an idea of some of the things we've been learning. So I'll start with the first one. She's got chemo tomorrow. She's on her 31st round. I've got full-on survivor guilt. I couldn't cope with what she's going through. I think this kind of tells you a little bit about people aren't just ill and dying, but they're also going through like complex kind of treatments as well, and that's going to really affect them and also their kind of wider network around them. And there's so many kind of different emotions flying about. So you really need to consider that as you're kind of designing and making sure you're making things easy to read, everything that's kind of just been in the previous talks, really. And secondly, it's all going to come down to money. She won't want the kids to take on any debt. She won't want them paying for a funeral after she's gone. Funeral poverty is a really big issue, and it's getting worse at the moment because of the kind of cost of living. So making sure that prices are transparent when you're looking at funerals and that we're kind of offering solutions where possible, that's a really good thing to do. And finally, you should start planning as soon as you can before they get too ill. After the death, it's a lot to cope with to try and find out all the things they would have wanted. I think this is a really interesting one. It kind of touches on how death and funeral and the plans for a funeral is a bit of a taboo topic, and it can be hard for people to talk about. Even if they've got wishes themselves, they might not feel comfortable telling their family. And so for us as a design team, it's how do we consider that and make it a bit easier and try and enable that conversation in small ways where we can. So I'm going to take a step back to the start of a project. And before starting, I think these are some good questions to ask yourself. Do we need to talk to vulnerable people? And do you actually have the time and resources to do this properly? It might sound strange for a researcher to say, do we need to talk to people? But like, if you're not going to do it properly, then you need to kind of consider if you can do something else, whether it's just like talking to experts in the field. If it's just a small design thing, there's always a risk associated with doing this kind of research, and people could get upset, like the people you talk to. So you want to make sure you're doing it properly and you've got that kind of time to do it and really kind of get the service right. Even if you do if you do start, and I hope you do, it's really good to talk to experts in the field anyway. So for us internally, this means like talking to our great funeral arrangers, people on kind of customer service centres, and people in the kind of operations, so that we can understand and get a good base level of knowledge. And there's so much out there on this kind of stuff. There's podcasts, there's kind of reports from charities like Marie Curie, there's loads of newspaper articles, social media. Just immerse yourself in all of this. Try and get that really good base level of understanding. That's going to make you more confident. It's going to help you kind of plan your conversation guide a lot more thoroughly, and it will just make you kind of more aware of what you don't know as well. A really useful step for us internally was going through this with our data ethics team. Your organizations might have something different or looks a bit similar. This one is, I think it's open, like it's free to use from the Open Data Institute. So it does have a bit of a focus on data, but also it kind of makes you look at kind of questions like how are you going to communicate findings, how are you going to communicate with the people in the sessions, and what are the possible negative impacts of that. And so it's really helpful for kind of me as a researcher just to feel more confident that we're not missing anything and that we've got all of our kind of bases covered. Also, just getting more people from around your business or organization involved in the planning, it's just going to make your methodology a lot more solid and secure. One thing that I find really useful to do is having introductions before any kind of research session. So scheduling a video intro call with each person. That's maybe 15, 30 minutes scheduled, but it doesn't have to take that long. Sometimes it's just 5 minutes, but it gives you a chance to essentially just to say hello. And it's going to mean you recognize each other. You will feel a lot more comfortable as a researcher or the person leading it, but more importantly, they will as well. You've got a bit of that personal connection. You can also touch on the kind of topic of what you're going to be talking about very lightly, just to kind of gauge how they react to it. If it's really good to know if you think someone's going to find it more stressful than others, because that can maybe tailor your approach a little bit different. Also, the classic kind of things of right to withdraw and doing kind of technical checks. It's good to get them out of the way. Getting rid of some of the technical issues. You're not going to get rid of them all. I'll guarantee you that. There'll still be people who can't get onto a Zoom call or that kind of thing. But it will make, again, it's all about making the participant just feel confident and comfortable with going into that session, because they're going to be a little bit scared. They're going to talk about some quite sensitive topics, obviously. One thing I always try to do is ask, how are you today, rather than how are you, or a kind of version of that. And that's just because I don't want to start off by going straight into the thing that's hard for them to talk about. You want to start off with what would probably end up happening, like a classic English person, is talk about the weather. that kind of thing, just not going too deep too quickly. On the other side of that, some people will want to, as soon as they get on the call, kind of rush into things and tell you their whole story. This might happen later in the session, but equally, if that does happen, give people the space to do so. They've got a story and they probably have almost pre-prepared it in their head a little bit. So let them get it out. It doesn't matter if it doesn't fit all your research objectives. It's going to give you really useful wider context, and it lets people just get things off their chest. And then you can kind of continue and go into things that are more tailored to what you specifically need to learn. And people can also struggle to talk, so it's really useful to have some prompts or exercises ready if that does happen. This is one example of something we've used recently, and these are kind of on the right in the pink post-it. You see different kind of tasks that people might be doing if they were kind of getting involved in some form of end-of-life planning. And it's really just a good kind of trigger for people to think, oh yeah, that kind of applies to me, for things they might not have forgotten or in the moment they can't quite remember. Equally, could use a kind of emotion chart to help people find the specific thing that they were feeling at the time. Research sessions can get difficult. They can get quite emotional. I think it's so important to stay calm and create a safe but also a neutral space. Researchers, we're not therapists. We're not really there to offer support. And by that, I don't mean like not reacting to someone's story or people's trauma. It's about like listening to them, recognizing that, like kind of thanking them for talking to you about it, but really just kind of letting them go on and letting them tell their story without kind of replicating too much kind of emotion. Just one quick story about that. I remember having one research session in the past where I had a guy and I asked him how would he what advice he would give to someone in a similar situation, and that suddenly made him change, and he got a lot more emotional, and kind of there were some tears. And for me, like, I had to stay calm in that situation, had to kind of give him the space, acknowledge what he was doing, kind of tell him it was fine to like grab some tissues, that kind of thing, but really just let him go on. And that enabled us to kind of continue the conversation and reiterating the importance and value of what he was doing. Also, it's really important to look after yourselves. So make sure you run check-in sessions for the researcher, for the wider team, hopefully after each session, also at the end of the day. You'll be listening to a lot of difficult stories. And actually, I've found that observing can be harder than running the session, because it's like you're watching TV, you're not actively involved. That's also why it's really good to manage numbers. So there is enough room for flexibility on that. If someone wants to drop out, but there's no other observers, that kind of forces them into it when they might not be in the right kind of mind frame to keep on listening. And I'll kind of just end on this statement as well. Try and be brave. It can be a bit daunting doing research into the topics like this. It certainly was for me when I first kind of did it, but it's the only way we can understand the needs of people going through this and through bereavement, and they really deserve to be understood. So yeah, if there's anything you take from my talk, it's don't shy away from these. It's conversations, it's worth it, and we can make things better for people in the future. So thank you.
That was great. Thanks so much, Jamie. I was dismissing all the notifications fast enough. There's so much love for you in the chat. And I don't know if you could see all the emojis while you're presenting, but so much love. Thank you. So we're going to move on to Sarah Key now, if you're here, Sarah.
Hi there.
Hi, thanks so much. So Sarah's the lead content designer at the NHS Blood and Transplant. Her talk's going to explore when death can make a difference. So navigating dying and bereavement for organ donation. Sarah's going to talk about how the NHS Blood and Transport team approached their content challenges so far. Over to you. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of what we've done so far. But just to give you an idea of who we are before I start, hopefully you can see some of the faces of our incredible donors on screen now. So we look after blood donation in England and also organ transplant services across the UK. We do a myriad of other things as well. So we're specialists in the storage and transplantation of blood, organs, tissues, bone marrow, as well as world-leading experts in research into the field and clinical services. But as you can tell, hopefully from this slide, it's donors that are at the heart of what we do, whether you're a blood donor like Ramon on the left-hand side, a plasma donor like Allegria in the centre, who's just donated plasma for medicine, or Bharat on the right hand side, who's he's in the right hand side of the picture, pictured here with his son. He donated both kidneys, cornea and other tissues after his death. The challenge that we face as an NHS organisation is that partly we have to follow some of the brand guidelines that the NHS places on us. We're an arm's length body, but we are obviously part of the NHS family. But we have a unique proposition and a unique place, I think, in what the public consider to be the NHS. Part of that is that the topic of death kind of runs throughout or alongside almost all of our messages that we put out there, but we don't have any specific guidance on how to talk about it. We talk about extreme life or death, illness, death itself, and bereavement a lot. In the example of organ donation, the majority of organ transplants come from people who have died. Living donations do happen every year, but the vast majority come from people who've died. But one of the tricky things for us is that the decision about organ donation is generally made and has to be spoken about way in advance of death. And our research suggests, and obviously James has also talked about today, that users really struggle to deal with the topic of death in this context, when it's in the same way that they probably struggle to deal with it in that visceral immediate moment and in the time after, and potentially for a long time after. It's also difficult to get your head around the subject in advance. It's still very taboo, and it's particularly difficult, I think, because when it comes to organ donation, you have to make your own decision, and then you need to work out how to communicate that to your family and your loved ones. And some of the feedback that we have is people don't want to upset their family or their partner, and it's particularly difficult for certain audience segments we found to kind of engage with this subject. One of the other complicating factors is that case studies are incredibly helpful when it comes to helping people to work out what they want to do, how they want to, like, what decision they want to make, and also with promoting the work that we do. But often language in those case studies tends to differ from what we might want to use as an organisation. So an example shown on screen at the moment is Kira's story, and in that you'll see that they've used past. Obviously, we need to honour that. That's their voice. Some families specifically say that they don't want to use the term died, as it doesn't sit well with them, and for us that's fine. We'll always use terminology that they're comfortable with, but it's something that I think we need to be intentional about, because there's a potential that it'll sit against maybe more pragmatic language about death or not. We just need to have we need to be intentional about it, and at the moment we don't necessarily have guidelines that can help with that, which is why we're developing them. One of the even more complex areas about this is that when it comes to whole blood and blood components like platelets, death isn't necessarily right at the forefront of maybe your mind when you're donating blood or when we're thinking about how to market it. But blood is often used for scenarios where a person might die if they don't receive a transfusion. So things like trauma, major surgery, cancer treatment. This was really brought home to me. I last week when I attended a donor recognition event. If you've donated over a certain number of times, you might be lucky enough to be invited to an event. And as part of that, a guest speaker talked with really, really raw emotion about how she was incredibly grateful to the donors in the room, sat in a room of maybe 80 people, of which about half were blood and blood component donors. I think the number was around 19,000 lives had been impacted by the donations made in that room, which is quite incredible. And that particular guest speaker was talking about how she'd received blood transfusions during surgery for a brain tumour, and she happily, very clearly said, "I would not be here. I would have died if I didn't have those transfusions." But sometimes it's quite difficult to engage some of our stakeholders from those areas because they don't necessarily think about death in the same way as maybe those who work on organ donation, where death is talked about all the time. Also with some blood products, donations might help to kind of make a life better, as it were. So in the case of sickle cell disease, at the moment, or when we first started, we didn't have a detailed or agreed tone of voice or style guide, which also complicated factors. And we have developed in the last year an inclusive language guide that advises on how to write and talk about certain protected characteristics. But part of that feedback is that we potentially need to develop some content around suicide. So hopefully that gives you an idea of where we are and the challenges that we face. So what we've done, hopefully this will help you if you've you've watched some of the presentations today and you've thought, okay, this is great, but how do I start? Where can I go from here? For us, it was clear that we needed to define our house style when it came to talking about death and dying. We were lucky enough to have a talk from Helen about death and other difficult words, which was incredibly helpful and really kick-started this process for us. So I'd really recommend watching some of her recorded content if you haven't already. We've also gone through and gathered information and scenarios from the organisation and spoken to our in-house experts. Everyone from, we have a content designer, Alan, who has years of experience in this content, our press team who helped write our case studies, and the specialist nurses who actually speak to immediately bereaved families about their choices around organ donation. And we also researched what others did, so hospices, more widely in the NHS, the Samaritans charities, we've kind of put everything into this massive Miro board, which it's continuing to grow. So this is a little bit out of date, but putting it all in one place has been really, really helpful. We've listed acceptable and unacceptable terminology because we found that, and I'm not sure if you'll be able to see on this slide, there is a section for things we need to avoid, and things like organ harvesting, not okay. Some of them are really clear cut, and some of them we need to, it's a bit more nuanced, so trying to find space for that within our guide as well. We've also tested or kind of played back to stakeholders to check if we're on the right track, which has been really helpful to kind of gauge where we are, and documented as much as possible in one shared place. So it's been a few months, and currently we're in the latter stages of developing a style guide, which includes death and dying guidance specifically, and we're also reviewing our inclusive language guide around how to talk about suicide. I will say that the Samaritans are really, really helpful for advice in this area if anyone's needing to do that for their organisation. It is complicated. So there's terminology that we wouldn't use as an organisation, but as I've said, in reported speech or in case studies, we will allow the use of that. And in those scenarios where maybe there's a case study where they use passed away, I'm trying to find a way to write our guides so that it gives you flexibility to mimic that language alongside a case study, so that you don't have the jarring of different terminology sat next to each other, and also in a way that potentially might upset a family, for example, who wrote a case study. There is a larger issue that remains, though, that death is a taboo subject, and until that changes, talking about organ donation after death is likely to be a real challenge. It's particularly a problem for us because we simply can't change this alone. It's going to need to be facilitated by a societal shift, and I don't have the power to do that. So we're trying to work out where we go next, and where we fit into the current picture. Also TBC at this stage, we need to work out what advice we give around kind of grieving and bereavement terminology, because I haven't even got into that yet. That seems to be a whole other factor, and we do talk about it sometimes. I've already referenced bereaved families, just naturally while I've been talking about this topic. So yeah, that's something that we need to confirm. But if you're looking for my tips on where to get started, and how to avoid some of the stumbling blocks that I've come across so far, my suggestions so far are audit what your organisation currently says. We didn't have any guides, but we did have a lot of content, and looking through, although we have 17 websites, I've not been able to go through each one with a fine-tooth comb. Speaking to experts and doing some searches has given me quite a lot of information to put into that. Having one shared place for research and information has been really, really helpful, as I've already said. And and mapping out and including all of the relevant stakeholders that you can. As I say, our press team has been particularly helpful, and we have specialist clinical staff as well as marketing teams. But there's probably even more stakeholders that I could go on to list. So mapping those has been incredibly important. I'd really recommend testing your findings with others. As I mentioned, getting that gauge for whether you're on the right track. And I specifically mean stakeholders and other content professionals, I found really helpful. And also, this is probably a given in the current, with the current audience, but be patient with yourself and be mindful of your own bias. I personally am quite comfortable being very pragmatic about death terminology, but I'm aware that others might not be. And there've also been various scenarios where it's been incredibly helpful having, for example, a specialist nurse on hand to be able to say this terminology may offend this particular audience that we'd just not considered. And in terms of what we do next, I feel like my quote is chiming perfectly with what James said, but it hints at the fact that we're going to be doing some user testing hopefully in the next 3 months. We'll be piggybacking on some user testing that's already happening with some questions about death and dying. And this will be with specifically around organ donation, and hoping that we'll be able to publish our guide and get feedback from within the organisation. So that's everything from me. That's my 10 minutes. Thank you very much. And if you have questions about what we've done so far, feel free to get in contact with me. I've got my Twitter handle there. And if you're interested in organ donation, then I've put the website up. You can really, really make a difference after you've gone. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sarah. Such important work. That was great. So now to move on to our last speaker, Nia, if you're there, I can see you. If you don't mind sharing.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Thank you.
So Nia worked at Marie Curie during the pandemic, where her work focused on providing information for carers of people with a terminal illness. She then moved home to care for a mum who died 3 months later. So Nia's going to talk about her experiences and the things that you learn when you become your user. Thanks, Nia.
Lovely. Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Nia. Thanks for having me. Just to repeat, I'll be talking about my experiences of working at Marie Curie during the pandemic before moving home to look after my mum who died of breast cancer. So here's my mum. My mum had already been living with terminal breast cancer for about 4 years when I joined Marie Curie in 2020. In fact, I'd also been through breast cancer myself in that time and got the all clear, and that's something I'll come back to a bit later. So for those who don't know, Marie Curie is a national charity that provides support and information for people at the end of their lives. They have about 9 hospices across the UK and a fleet of incredible nurses who visit people at home day and night. And here's a screenshot of the website, which shows the type of information we were working with. So things like how to care for someone dying at home and signs that someone might be dying. And my first task on joining was to review information for unpaid carers. And as a content designer, naturally, my first question was, well, who are carers and what are their needs? And I started building a picture of carers, and these were just some of the recurring themes. And we also heard from the Marie Curie helpline that the pandemic was causing an extra layer of stress for carers. So people had questions like, can I still go into somebody's home to care for them? Will the police stop me if my area goes into local lockdown? And can I visit someone who's dying in hospital? And to learn a bit more about carers' experiences, I started attending virtual coffee mornings organised by Carers UK. Carers UK is an organisation that supports unpaid carers and basically fights for their rights. And we were also gathering feedback through forms on the Marie Curie website, where we'd ask, what information were you looking for? Was the page useful? And what other information did you need? And there's a piece of feedback that really stuck in my mind. It was for a webpage called How to Move Someone in Bed. And it gave a step-by-step guide on how to roll someone on their side so you could change the bed sheets around them. And the question was, well, how do you do it when the person has also soiled themselves and you also need to change their clothing? And I could really feel the frustration and the sort of hopelessness in the tone of the message that we received, but I couldn't really picture what that person was going through. And I learned the hard way that, like most things in life, dying is messy. It turns out that writing about caring for someone who's dying doesn't really prepare you for it. There's an experiential boundary that you don't really cross until you become the user. So after a year at Marie Curie, I finished work and moved home to help care for my mum. Her treatment had stopped working, which we knew would happen eventually, and she was experiencing all sorts of symptoms as the cancer was spreading. And during difficult nights where we'd have to call out nurses at 3 a.m., I would text a friend who would give me some honest and practical guidance, which was based on their own experiences. And what I came to realize was that while we'd sort of given these step-by-step guides, we hadn't really framed them, and I felt like content could only take me so far. So yes, we'd given the steps to moving someone in bed and changing the sheets, but what we hadn't said was that if you have to do that every day, that is a lot of time and a lot of washing. And we had another page, for example, that was to help get somebody to the toilet. What we hadn't said was that, you know, it could take an hour or even longer to help them get to the loo and back into bed. And they may not make it in time. And, you know, again, that's a lot of mess to deal with. One Marie Curie nurse told me when I joined, carers are the experts in their worlds. They find their own ways of caring and coping. And not everyone wants to know what to expect at the end of someone's life. But I really felt that we should be giving people the choice in learning about it and not being afraid to show how it really is. So I tried to sort of summarize maybe what I'd learned through this experience. And first and foremost, I think we need to acknowledge that information is not always a substitute for support. You know, content can't always solve real life problems. I think second, being honest about what to expect can really help people if they're ready to know. You know, we shouldn't shy away from telling them how it really is. And the third comes back to that experiential boundary, being mindful of how far user research can actually take us. And I think there's a lot we can do to support unpaid carers in our lives and in our works. And I'll just speak about maybe two of these points. There's a lot of research already out there. For example, Marie Curie published some brilliant reports, and Carers UK publish a report each year called The State of Caring. You know, and carers have already given up their valuable time and energy to fill in these surveys, and I think it's important that we do make the most of this research. And another important thing, which a few people have already spoken about, is that if you're working with an unpaid carer, they might be grieving. Anticipatory grief is a very real and complex thing, and carers are often grieving before the person they care for has died. To finish up, I'm going to talk briefly about a personal project I'm working on at CDL as part of my professional development. As I mentioned at the start of the talk, I was diagnosed with primary breast cancer in 2018 at the age of 32. So at a time when my friends were excitedly meeting with wedding planners, mortgage advisors, and health visitors, I had a breast nurse, an oncologist, and a surgeon. So I'm now sort of in a place where I can really think about mapping these experiences. And I'm trying to do this as an open source user journey to better understand really the sort of physical journey, the emotional journey, and the information points and needs along the way. So I'm hoping to explore sort of how services fit together, or in some cases don't, the quality of communication, how waiting times affect people's experiences of cancer and, you know, maybe other terminal illnesses, and essentially just thinking about the things that were good and the things that could be improved. I really don't know what the outcome will be as yet, but if anybody is interested in or working in this field, I would really love to speak to you. You know, if you're doing sort of cancer journey mapping, mapping as therapy, you know, mapping terminal illness, please do get in touch. My email address is nia@contentdesign.london, and I'm on Twitter at Nia R. Campbell. And that's me. Thank you very much for having me and listening.
Thank you very much. for sharing all of that very personal stuff with us. It's when people can share things like that that we will learn, and when we learn, we will make our services better. And that's what we're all here to do, and that's what content designers want to do. Whether you're here on this call as a content designer or not, I know we have celebrants and funeral directors on the call as well. I would just like to say a massive thank you to each one of our speakers. You've blown me away. This is overwhelming. Every single talk, I think we can all take something from. So thank you all very much for your talks, and thank you all. We've had the busiest time. We had about 308 people on a call, and that's not bad. I would like to open up the conversation now. Is there anybody who would like to say anything or ask any questions or say anything to someone? The chat has been popping off. There's been some good stuff going on in the chat. If nobody wants to speak, I can carry on. I mean, people on my team know this.
I'll be brave.
Okay, who's being brave?
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm a senior content designer at Bupa. There's quite a few of our team here. We've kind of infiltrated. Thanks everyone. That was so interesting. It was popping off in our own Bupa chat as well, just talking about like, oh my God, yes, we all agree. Like, it's been brilliant. I had a question for Lisa to go right back to the beginning. I just wondered how you found, that thing of offering customers a choice of channel. I completely get that and understand. And often in a lot of the work I do, the whole business aim angle is reduce calls because calls cost money and we have to run a call center. Let's digitize everything. And I just wondered how kind of, if you go back to the business and actually say we want to offer a choice and have different channels available, were they quite receptive to that, or did you meet any resistance?
No resistance, very receptive. And I think that there's a couple of things. There's two things. The first thing is the business are open to every improvement. So like if you, the main channel for us is actually in person, because we have this incredible relationship with our customer and because of the nature of bereavement, that communication face to face is actually key. But we all know that sometimes the grief is too much, bereavement's too much, and you have to step away and have that arm's length conversation. But I think it's more about making it was the business are obviously open to everything, but the reality is when you're a designer, you need to look at the opportunities within a process to offer a position where it's an easy switch, and it's not about them choosing one or the other. It's about all of them being available in an accessible way. And it's not just about, because one of the things we noticed was some of our staff were using the bereavement line to call our bereavement team to support in branch conversations. So why were they doing that? What's the root cause of the channel switch, and what is the root cause of someone, especially for a colleague, but then on top of that, why does a user do that switch? And it's for bereavement, that's not an easy question to answer. So one side, the business are open, but two, they also had to be open for the consistency to be there, because they can't have these journeys, these three channels being drastically different. They have to be seamless. So, and I think the challenge was ultimately not in getting them to agree, it's ultimately bringing them all in line. And that's something that will be a constant journey to make sure that we're making sure all of them meet each other. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
No worries.
I also, from a funeral care perspective, very interested in that journey as well, because it is about the customer journey and allowing the customer to take the journey that they want and have a consistent experience with every touch point. Mm-hmm. Jessica Smith, you have your hand up if you'd like to ask a question.
States. Thank you so much, all the presenters, and Helen, I think, for coordinating this conversation. It's really important. And I also just wanted to say, as a point of quick feedback, it was so practical and wonderful storytelling and great resources all in one. So just really wonderful. My question is, well, actually, I want to mention as a resource for those who may be looking to have continued these conversations, there's the Ethics Design Network. I'll see if I can find a link to that and put that in the chat for anybody who's interested, because they have all sorts of conversations around trauma-informed things, which of course might include these various health and death related conversations. But so my question is, what tools or conversations or guidelines do some of you, and this is really an open question, have for creating cultural competency considerations within attitudes and language around death? I did hear some conversation about how you adjust based on research and preference, but yeah, I'm curious for information about cross-cultural competency, because not only, I mean, from region to region, but you might serve people in your own region that are from other places. So I'd love to hear about that.
Do any speakers want to answer that question? That was a slightly tricky question. I get asked questions a little bit about this as well, about funeral care. How do you write about funeral care when there are people from different backgrounds and different religions that are organising different events? And I suppose the way to do that is to just do as much research as you can and talk to people and find out about what they need. And if you need to do specific research with a certain group of people, then make sure that happens, find them. I think one thing that we realised after doing the research that Jamie spoke about, so the end of life planning and somebody's about to die research, was people are willing to speak. And if you ask people in the right way, they are willing to talk to you. And Sarah, you may have found that as well doing your research, and I know that you have as well, Lisa and Jane. But I think if you ask people in the right way, they will talk to you. And I think you do need to go to them.
Yes.
They're not going to come to you.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Having a clear picture as well of, I mean, as working in a bank, it's because we're aware of who our users are, because we interact with them so regularly. It's not easy, but it can be quite. But it's clearer. The picture's clearer of who they are and what the demographics are, because we have such frequent interaction with them. So, like you say, listening to them, but drawing together all of these areas of research to have clear personas. There are things that in clear areas of harm in these interactions. So we have a picture of who the people are and where we could fall down broadly if we fail them in a particular way, and making sure we all know what they are and have them in a shared place. I mean, shared resources are the key thing, aren't they? So, yeah.
I also think we can do more events like this. This has been, I mean, Joe and I have run Content Teatime now for about 3 years. We started it used to be an in-person event, and we started it online during the pandemic. And this has been the most attended talk that we've ever done. This has been the most engaged that we've ever done. And I think that finding speakers was easy. I had to turn people away because there were so many people that wanted to speak about this. And so I think we can do another one again of something of this nature, because it's really crucial stuff, and we are all going to need this content at some point in our lives, because this affects everybody. So I think we'll keep doing these events. Would anybody else? Sorry, let me have a look who else. Somebody has their hands up. I think Simon Clark, are you still here, or have you?
Yeah, still here.
Okay,
still
Simon,
here.
if you'd like to ask
yeah, it's a research related question. So you did touch on earlier that if you ask people in the right way, they will open up. But on such a sensitive subject, when are people doing that research? Are you asking them in the moment? Are you asking them sort of before? I mean, what's your suggestion on how to do research on such a sensitive subject sensitively?
Jamie, can you answer that?
Sure. I mean, I suppose it kind of depends exactly what you're trying to learn, right? So like we've had lots of past research projects where we're talking to people after a bereavement. That doesn't mean it's any easier. It could still be like very traumatic and hard for them to talk about, but it will vary kind of, I suppose, depending on at what point in that person's journey, if that's the right word, you talk to them. And there's no like golden rule. There's no like you should ask it this way to get a response from people. I think you have to kind of take a kind of bit of a pragmatic approach of gauging the person and trying to see how willing they are to talk about it, and being prepared, so you have a plan B and a plan C for different ways to ask the question and things you can share with them. Like if you're doing it remotely or in person, you can have either like bits of paper with like word tasks on it and that kind of thing to kind of get them to interact with it, kind of maybe getting people to plot out a timeline of events. It's not directly asking them specific questions about what they were what they did, what happened, but getting them to go recall through their memory in a more of an exercise way. I think there's a few different ways you can do it, and it's about just also just really planning and making sure you write questions the right way, so you're not kind of leading them or doing anything that could make them feel bad in the way you ask it. I think there's a bit of a knack to it, and it's not like easy for me to say how to do it. It's just kind of practicing and making sure you're doing it again and again and checking things before, and doing dry runs with people as well. It's always really helpful to get any changes and make you feel confident going into it.
And at the end of my talk, I've done lots of talks about this subject. Some of you have seen it. And one of the questions I get asked the most at the end is, should you do user research with somebody in this situation? And this question was asked to me at Camp Digital just last summer. And it was from somebody who works at a rape crisis centre, and they were working on the website, and they say, should we work with people that have been through this, a terrible traumatic experience? And the answer is absolutely, if they want to. Obviously, it's all about consent, keeping them safe, letting them know they can leave at any time, but you are only going to make services that are better for them by talking to them. And very often we have found that people want to help. They really want to share their experiences. I sat in on and watched a research session that Jamie here did just a couple of weeks ago, just before Christmas, with a man whose wife is terminally ill, stage 4 liver cancer or bowel cancer, very, very seriously ill. And he started off the research sitting on a table at a desk, swinging around, fidgeting quite a bit. And he was asking us lots of questions about the co-op, and when the co-op nearly went under a few years ago, and he was sort of being trying to distract the conversation a lot. But after some time, he then moved seats physically, and he went and he sat somewhere more comfortable, and he was swinging around, and he saw his shoulders come down, and he calmed down, and he really opened up. And that is, Jamie's skill as a user researcher, but also that opportunity for that guy to talk to us about what he's going through. I think he benefited. I think he benefited from doing that research as much as we benefited from hearing his story. So I think, as Jamie said, be brave, ask the questions. You can always stop. You can always tell people that they are not bound to this. They are doing it when they feel most comfortable. I think we've got time for one more question. And Sarah Giblin has her hand up. So Sarah, if you're still on the call, if you'd like to ask your question.
I am. Thank you so much for this. I can barely tell you how useful it was to have this before I'm about to start on a load of beta testing this weekend for an app to help people prepare for the practicalities of death in the digital age. So that's what I'm going to be doing. But my specific question was for Sarah Key. It just jumped out at me as you were speaking. So is there, it's just a technical question, is there a specific way that people can state that they would like to have their organs donated? Like, what is enough? Is it, does it have to be on a piece of paper? Can a family member just say, yes, they said they would? I hope you don't mind me asking that question.
Yeah, no problem at all. And thanks for the question. So it's slightly complicated. The best thing, if today you think, right, I have definitely made a decision, or if you want to inform yourself, come to our website. If you've made a decision, and either way is fine, if you definitely do or you definitely don't, regardless, go to the organ donation website. I've included a link in the chat. There's an option to register your decision, and you can opt in or opt out of the organ donor register. That goes into a central database, and it means that the percentage of people that die in a situation where they can donate organs is minuscule. It's in the single percent every year. Mm-hmm. You need to die in very specific circumstances. So I'm probably won't surprise you. I'm opted in. For me, I would love to be able to donate organs if I'm in the situation. And so from my point of view, there are very few people that are lucky enough in a way to die in circumstances where they're able to donate organs. At that point, if you do die in the circumstances that allow for donation, it will be prompted by a specialist nurse who will come and speak to your loved ones and will say, we can see that Sarah's opted in to the organ donor register. But at that point, we know that some families will say, or I mean, the most difficult situation is when there's no decision recorded, because at that point the question will be asked, would you like to consider them for organ donation? And if a family doesn't know and there's no decision registered, then quite often it seems that people will say, no, I just, it's too much. We've already talked about the like mental load of death, the shock. Often people who, from what I understand, the majority of people who die who can donate organs, it's quite sudden. In that what has led them to their death is quite sudden. It's not necessarily a terminal illness that's gotten them to this point, so they've not had to confront the idea of their loved one's death. And so although opting into the register is a fantastic thing to do, and I would absolutely encourage anyone, either way, register your decision. Definitely go to our website and do that. But one of the things that you also need to do is to speak to your family, because your family will always be consulted, always. And if they, for whatever reason, even if you have decided to do, you've registered that you would like, your decision is that you'd like to, if your family don't understand your decision, or they're not on board with it, or it's the first time they've ever heard about it, that may cause enough confusion or enough pause for thought that it doesn't happen. And so this is one of the really big things, is that it's not necessarily as easy as like a tick box or even just registering a decision. There isn't necessarily an easy route, but if you are looking at one thing you can do, it would be to point towards the organ donor register and to encourage people to just register a decision, but also to back that up with, that's great, and obviously our website will do this, but back it up with the next thing you need to do is to talk to your family, and there's advice about how to do that on our website. But we know that for many user groups, this is something that people really struggle with. It's been interesting seeing in the chat, a few people saying, oh, I'm very pragmatic about talking about end of my life and death, coming from an Irish background, it's really, really common. That's something that's actually come up when we've been discussing this with our subject matter experts, is that the difference, and specifically holding up the way that the Irish seem to approach death as being particularly healthy, and being able to talk about it with family members and it being kind of a productive, positive conversation, is what we would love for more people to move towards. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Super, yeah, thanks very much. And I will check out. In fact, I've followed all of you, so I will see you online.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a great answer. And I think all of us, I'm on the donor register. We should all be on the donor register. I am going to wrap that up now because it's 5:15. I am going to put some overtime in. But that was a really superb session. Thank you all very much for joining, and thank you all speakers. And yeah, I think I really enjoyed it. That was superb. I'm overwhelmed. I'm really delighted that it's gone so well. This is such an important, everybody who knows me, I bang on about this daily. The people in my team know that I am this upbeat about this topic almost every day, without fail. So to have so many of you feeling the same way is just absolutely brilliant. And as I always end the talks, we are the people that can do the thing and look out for other people and have those honest conversations. And if you know somebody who's struggling, or if you know somebody who's grieving, go and check in with them. It doesn't matter how long ago, and talk about the person that died, because you're never going to remind them that they died. They've not forgotten that. You just remind them that they lived. Now, I sounded a little bit like Jerry Springer there, but I always like to end on that to leave people with a bit of something positive. But until next time, thank you all very much. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen, for organising.
Yeah, it's been brilliant.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Cool. Great to meet you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks ever so much. Bye.
Bye, Julie.